The boy was holding a video camera, ready to record himself playing and singing, when suddenly, a loud crashing sound came from outside the window. Mike quickly pulled back the curtain to see what was happening. Across the street, he saw his neighbor's husband violently abusing his wife. The woman's screams grew louder and more desperate, and it seemed like things were about to turn deadly if someone didn't intervene. Summoning his courage, Mike sneaked over to the neighbor's house, but as soon as he entered, he froze in horror at the sight before him. The woman lay on the floor covered in blood, seemingly lifeless. Before Mike could even think about helping, the killer, wielding a knife, spotted him. It was the husband, Carl. Realizing he had been caught, Carl's eyes filled with murderous intent. Mike bolted, running for his life. But before he could get far, he was hit by a car and killed instantly. This tragic scene was witnessed by Mike's friend Ollie. Fast forward 25 years, Mike's family, devastated by his death, had long since moved away from the painful memories of that place. A woman named Annie, her husband, and their daughter had just moved into the house where Mike once lived. While sorting through some old belongings, they came across a video camera and an old television. When they turned it on, they found footage of Mike playing and singing. As the family of three watched, suddenly, thunder roared outside and the power flickered. The TV, which had been playing Mike's video, abruptly went black. A few seconds later, something eerie happened. The television started playing news footage from 1989, even though Mike's tape was still in the player. There was no reason for it to be playing anything else. Later that evening, Annie and her husband invited some friends over to celebrate the move, and they shared what had just happened. One of their friends was Jalen, who had been Mike's childhood best friend. Jalen told them everything about Mike's tragic death. He explained that the weather during the days leading up to Mike's accident had been exactly the same as it was now. And coincidentally, tonight was the anniversary of Mike's death. Annie's husband thought Jalen was just messing with them, but later that night, he looked up the story online and found details about the murder. Still, since it had been so long ago, they didn't give it much thought. After the family went to bed, the storm outside intensified. And then in the middle of the night, the TV in Annie's house suddenly turned on by itself. The woman trembled as she stared at the shifting shadows in the room. She couldn't believe what was happening before her eyes. The TV, which had clearly been turned off, had suddenly switched on by itself. Could the house really be haunted? Annie quickly reached out to turn the television off, but just then, a powerful flash of lightning struck outside, triggering something truly bizarre. It was as if Mike, who had died years ago, was calling her through a video chat. Annie watched in terror, and at the same time, back in 1989, Mike also noticed something strange. He saw an unfamiliar woman suddenly appear on his TV screen. Cautiously, he approached and greeted her. What neither of them knew was that their two timelines had somehow become connected. After a brief conversation, they both confirmed that they could see and hear each other. Mike noticed that the sign behind Annie looked exactly like the one at the bus stop near his house. Annie explained that she and her husband had met at that bus stop, and as a keepsake, they had stolen the sign. As they continued talking, the sound of a violent commotion outside distracted Mike. Knowing what was about to happen, Annie frantically tried to stop him from going outside, but Mike didn't believe her warnings about what was to come. To prove that she was really from the future, Annie showed Mike all of his videotapes, and even pulled up a news article on her phone about his death. She begged him not to leave the house that night, explaining that 25 years ago, on this very night, he was hit by a car. Still, Mike thought it was all just an elaborate prank. No matter how much Annie pleaded with him, Mike eventually stepped outside anyway. However, the conversation had delayed him just long enough that by the time he got out, the car had already sped away. The next day at school, Mike noticed that the clock on the wall had indeed been struck by lightning, just as Annie had said. His teacher also informed the class that due to a power outage, lessons would be canceled for the day. With nothing else to do, Mike returned home, hoping to reconnect with Annie through the TV. But no matter how long he waited, she didn't appear. Then, he remembered Annie mentioning something about his neighbor Carl. Determined to test the truth of her claims, Mike snuck into Carl's house while he was away. He quietly searched room by room, and eventually, in the bathroom, he discovered the body of Carl's murdered wife. The Prime Minister was abruptly woken from his sleep by a phone call. On the line, he was informed that the princess had been kidnapped. He immediately rushed to the living room to watch the video sent by the kidnappers. The woman in the video was indeed the princess, and after verification, it was confirmed that the video was not a hoax. If the Prime Minister didn't comply with the kidnappers' demands, the princess would be killed by 4 p.m. However, the demand was utterly outrageous. The kidnapper wanted the Prime Minister to broadcast himself having sex with a pig. The Prime Minister immediately instructed his team to take the video down, but his staff informed him that even though they removed it as quickly as possible, in the few minutes it was online, it had already been copied and spread by internet users. By that time, 50,000 people had already viewed the video. As the news spread, the entire country became fixated on the kidnapping. During interviews, many citizens expressed that the Prime Minister should not have to endure such humiliation. Yet, 28% of the public believed he should comply with the kidnappers' demand. As the Prime Minister struggled with the situation, the Queen called, expressing her confidence that he would do whatever it took to bring the princess back safely. Her message was clear. She expected the Prime Minister to comply with the kidnappers' demand hands if necessary. Fortunately, the tech
Technically,
team brought
yes,
some good
but-
news.
so
They
I
had
thought,
traced the
what
video's
we do
upload
now,
time
and
and
that's it,
identified a location,
closed
an abandoned
2010.
school. The Prime Minister immediately dispatched a team to investigate as a
No
backup
from
plan.
Blue
The
Eye.
Prime Minister's staff enlisted a special effects
no
artist.
one in
In case they
that's
couldn't
close.
rescue the princess in time, they planned to use a
Russian
body
TV
double for the
transmitted
live
in full. What
broadcast.
does-
Meanwhile, Mary, a reporter at a TV station,
wouldn't possible.
called a friend who
For
worked
anyone I
inside the
drink.
government, hoping to get
Very
some
friendly
inside
man,
information. At first, her friend refused
There's
to
no
reveal
comment.
any, so Mary sent him a makeup-free
The
selfie.
Guardian-
Smitten by her beauty, her friend caved and disclosed the news about the abandoned school being the suspect's hideout dock. At the same time, the television station's director received a mysterious package. When he opened it, he first found a USB drive, but to his horror, he soon discovered a severed finger inside, still wearing a diamond ring. The kidnapper sent a new video showing him cutting off the princess's finger from behind her. He claimed this was a punishment for the Prime Minister's failure to follow the rules and for attempting to deceive him.
Breaking
Soon
news
after, the
now,
TV
a
station
kidnapper
broadcasted the
removing
video,
it.
and
I can't watch
citizens,
this.
upon seeing the princess in such agony, were visibly distressed. The Prime Minister, after
Comes
watching the
just
video,
hours
couldn't
before the
understand why the
4 p.m.
kidnapper
deadline
had
out.
suddenly become so enraged, but it didn't take him long to realize that his own subordinates must have done something. He immediately confronted his female assistant, who had no choice but to confess. It turned out that, in preparation for the worst-case
You need to get
scenario,
into
they had
this.
planned to use a body double to perform the live broadcast. Furious, the Prime Minister exploded in anger. He promptly ordered the investigation team to move in at once. The team, which had been staking out the abandoned school, began their assault, surrounding the building. But as they kicked open the classroom door, they were hit with a cloud of smoke. Upon closer inspection, they realized they had been tricked by the kidnapper. With time running out, the Prime Minister, unable to face reality, retreated into his office. But neither the public nor the government would let him off the hook. His subordinates soon informed him that the location for the live broadcast had been arranged and all the citizens were gathered in front of their televisions waiting. To comfort the Prime Minister, the government issued a mandate, banning the broadcast from being distributed. They also advised people not to watch it, but nothing could stop the public's curiosity. At that moment, the entire nation was glued to their TV screens. The Prime Minister entered the studio, where the other actor, the body double, was already prepared. And under the watchful eyes of the entire country, Prime Minister carried out the kidnapper's demand. Yet, while everyone was fixated on the broadcast, the princess had already been released, half an hour before the live stream even began. Meanwhile, the kidnapper had hanged himself in his home. When the woman woke up again, she realized she had lost all feeling in her legs. Terrified, Mary looked at her husband, but Jack reassured her, saying she had nothing to worry about. It was just a little nerve anesthetic. Mary stared at him in disbelief. As her husband turned to leave, she used her hands to support herself, slowly lowering her body to the floor. Desperate to escape, she tried to crawl out of the room, but to her horror, the door had already been locked by Jack. She sat on the ground, filled with despair, her eyes full of fear because this wasn't the first time Jack had done something like this. Previously, Mary had simply petted the neighbor's dog, not expecting that while she was at work, Jack would prepare a steak and a box of needles. He carefully inserted the needles into the middle of the steak, and when the neighbors weren't looking, tossed it to the dog. Every night, Mary had to take care of her husband, but with his lower body disability, he was constantly frustrated by his own limitations. This had completely destroyed Jack's sense of self-worth. Over time, Jack's mind became more and more twisted, and he even started suspecting that Mary was seeing another man. He began to frequently check her phone, though Mary remained loyal and never left his side. One day, Mary received an invitation from her company to attend a gathering. Jack, however, made an excuse, asking her to go downstairs to buy something. While she was gone, Jack secretly took her phone and installed tracking software on it. Later, during the gathering, as Mary was chatting with friends, she suddenly heard a sound coming from her phone, even though it wasn't in her hand. Confused, she went into the room to check and found that the screen of her phone was mirrored on Jack's computer. In that moment, everything became clear to her. Seizing the opportunity while Jack was in the shower, Mary hurriedly packed her bags, preparing to leave. What she didn't expect was, the man was preparing to apologize to his beautiful wife, but to his shock, he discovered that she had already found a new lover. What made him even angrier was that the man was none other than his best friend, Carl. It turned out that he and Carl were once co-workers, and due to Carl's distracted driving, Jack ended up paralyzed. After the accident, Carl frequently visited Jack at home, but Jack never expected that Carl would end up with his wife. Jack secretly followed them, watching as they shared loving moments together. Fueled by jealousy and rage, a sinister idea began to form in his mind. He went to a friend and purchased a large supply of sedatives. Later, he showed up at Mary's workplace, using the excuse that she had left her passport at home, and suggested she come back with him to retrieve it. Wanting her passport, Mary agreed to go back with him. Once they arrived at the house, Jack offered Mary a cup of coffee. She told him she needed to leave soon and asked him to give her the passport. Jack said the passport was in the bedroom, inside the nightstand. As soon as Mary walked into the room, Jack pulled out a syringe of tranquilizer from under the coffee table and followed her. While Mary was searching for the passport, Jack injected the tranquilizer directly into her hip. When she woke up, her hands and feet were tide. Mary struggled, unable to believe that Jack had become like this. To prevent the neighbors from hearing anything, Jack turned the music up to full volume. He then pulled out her phone from her bag and, posing as Mary, sent a breakup text to her lover. After that, he tossed the phone into the river without a second thought. That evening, Jack prepared dinner. Mary pretended to submit and took a bite. As Jack drank his wine, she quickly crawled under the bed, screaming for help. But just as she opened the door, Jack caught her again. The commotion, however, did manage to alert a neighbor. The neighbor knocked on the door, saying he had heard a woman screaming inside the house and threatened to call the police if Jack didn't let him in to check. With no other option, Jack reluctantly agreed to let the neighbor in to take a look. To Jack's surprise, the neighbor immediately spotted Mary lying motionless on the floor. And in that moment, Jack pulled out a small knife.